did it pick up?
They'll pick up everything.
So should we turn it off and off it? Okay.
Oh, hey. Nice to meet you. Sam Harwell. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Miss Repton, Susan Dudley.
Hi, I'm John Lang. Nice to meet you.
Good afternoon and welcome to the roundtable of the Commerce, Manufacturing, Trade Subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's great to have everybody here today. It's great to be a part of this. We're here to talk about how can we make it easier to make it in America, which my kind of background on this, well, first we'll get there. What we're going to do is have a few opening words from members of Congress and then go to each guest that's with us today to have 5 minutes to talk to an overview of what you would like to talk about making it easier in your field and or your experiences in industry. And then it'll be just a roundtable discussion. I know some of you are experienced from congressional committee. Some of you have been to testify before. So if somebody else says something you want to say, just get my attention. So if Sam says something that interests you, Susan, just let me know, and then we'll comment
I shouldn't
right off of that. Or just jump in. It's a roundtable. We're also live streaming, so this is available for public. Public is watching, so we'll make sure. Mic's not on. It's my father started working for Ford Motor Company when I was a baby just to pay the bills and to try to work his way through college. So he worked on the factory floor. So I grew up in an area that a lot of people worked in the aluminum industry. And so you either the pathway to the middle class I saw was through manufacturing. And I think that's still true for a lot of people today, and that's what we need to preserve it, and what's a big interest of mine. And in the last recession, the Great Recession we had in 1981, when I was a senior in high school, and people showed up for football practice the first day of high school in August and talked about what they were going to do after high school, and some of us were going to college. And I remember one guy made the comment, he said, well, I'm going to go work for Ford. I have somebody can get me on at Ford. I'm going to make more money than y'all make if you go to college. And that was true to some extent, and it was a legitimate economic decision. And then one day, about middle of the year, my senior year, I came home, my dad was talking to my mom, and she was crying, and I'm thinking, oh no, what happened in our house today? And my dad was telling her that they were closing the plant. So I've been there. I've seen families completely dislocated because of a plant closing. Ford Motor Company, Reynolds Aluminum to the most extent in that area. And it is traumatic. But my father had worked his way through Ford and working overtime, doing everything that he needed to do to get a college degree. And those who really didn't have the options. And so I've also always noticed and been interested in developing skills that are transferable versus having skills, your skills aren't as strong, and because the plant's located in your town, you can earn more money, but when the plant leaves, you don't have the opportunity. So those are some interests of mine. What my father did, he decided, well, if Ford's going to buy these parts and they're going to outsource, it was the beginning of outsourcing for Ford, and I know how to make them, then I'll buy some of the equipment, essentially, sort of like that, and started manufacturing some of the products he made as a Ford supervisor. He started making them for himself and started a company that I was working for when I got elected here. So I know the 1980 story of manufacturing. You know, we're from 1980s. You had 400,000 people in the steel industry. Now there's 88,000 people in the steel industry, and we make as much steel as we made when there were 400,000 people. And I'll just close with this, because this is where I kind of want to get to with this country. When I was preparing for this, I was reading a Harvard Business Review report, and it talked about American competitiveness in Michael Porter article. And he said, you know, to be competitive, you really have to define it two ways. It can't just be America's competitive in a business sense across the world. That's part of it. The other part is it also competitive in a way that raises the standard of living of Americans. And so you got to look at it from both directions, because you can become more competitive, you know, if it's at the expense of lowering the standard of living, then that's not what we want as policymakers. We want to be competitive while raising the standard of living, and it's obviously through skills and taxes and our tax policy and the regulatory policy we're going to talk about. Now, for those of you who are energy and commerce folks here, we're going to talk about all of the issues. Anything's fair game. You know, taxes are typically ways and means. Education and workforce is typically where you talk about skills. We're more regulatory in other areas such as that. But we want to talk about everything, and we're not. It's not a formal committee hearing. We're not crossing anyone's jurisdiction by bringing it all up. We want to get all the ideas on the table. And first, I would like to. Our full chairman of the committee, Fred Upton, is here for a few brief remarks, and then like I said, we'll go around to each of you when we have the opportunity to move forward. Mr. Upton?
Well, thank you, Brett, and I appreciate your leadership as well as Mary and Marcia's as well. There's a reason why this subcommittee has manufacturing in the title. CMT, Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade. And as a nation, we have lost a ton of manufacturing jobs over the last 7, 8, 9 years. And we want to do everything as a full committee and as a subcommittee as well to bring those jobs back and to identify real problems that we've had as a nation so that we can put people back to work, so that they can be productive players in their society, pay taxes, do all the different things that we as a strong nation ought to be able to do. So I'm really here to listen. We have a markup that's starting on the Keystone Pipeline within the hour, and I'm going to stop and want to listen to as much as I can before I have to leave and start that markup. But appreciate your leadership and the great staff, and I look forward to listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Bonomack.
Thank you, Brett, and thank you all very much for being here today. It's exciting to me, or for me, for a lot of reasons, and I just want to piggyback on what both Chairman Upton and Brett Guthrie have said about the importance of manufacturing in our country. And I think right now you can't basically attend any political speech or watch a State of the Union, watch a debate without the importance of manufacturing being brought up. I just want to say that I don't come from a manufacturing background. I come from a restaurant background and an entertainment background. So I'm learning an awful lot about this, and pleased that with Marcia Blackburn as my co-chair of the committee, when Fred suggested we added manufacturing into the title, we decided on CMT, sort of as an ode to country music television and Marcia's residence in Nashville. So it
is easier to remember.
It is much easier. Everybody still wonders what it was last Congress, but CMT it is. And I just want to say that since I've been on this quest, I've had the terrific fortune of meeting my constituent Liat Talla, who is here. And the biggest irony of Liat is she is an apparel manufacturer. And I went to her with an idea. She was already on this path, though. But I went to an idea about just manufacturing jeans in America. I mean, the quintessential American thing of blue jeans, right? And she said she was already doing it. And she was bringing her manufacturing to my congressional district. What could be better? But to make it a little bit more ironic, the name of her jeans are Kentucky Denim. So as an ode to you, but you can't have her back. So in any event, these are hers and made wholly in my district. And I want to, just say that it's been a pleasure to meet you. And certainly Liat is somebody who understands both the dynamic in China and the differences here in America, and then add on that extra layer of California, which complicates things even more with bringing businesses back. So I just want to welcome my constituent and again, applaud you for all of your hard work and your staff in putting this together, and I'm happy to yield to Ms. Blackburn.
Thank you so much, and I thank Chairman Bonomack for the work that she has done in helping to put the attention on how we develop and maintain and retain jobs in America. And certainly Brett Guthrie has done a wonderful job in organizing this hearing. And as Chairman Upton said, the goal is to listen to you and to find out what your advice does, what makes it easier, what makes it more difficult. When I talk about U.S.-based manufacturing and creating jobs in America, I like to use a little equation because it works every time. Less regulation plus less litigation plus less taxation equals more innovation and job creation. And certainly that's what we want to see. That's what we want to have in our country. I am so pleased that I have a guest today, Sam Harwell. He is the CEO of Big Time Toys. They are located in Nashville, LA, and in Hong Kong. And Sam has a wealth of information to share with us, and I'm looking forward to what he wants to bring to the table today as he looks at the domestic side and also the offshore side of manufacturing. He is a creative person with big ideas and is such a great example of the American entrepreneur. Building a business, growing that business, and then finding a way to retain that business even in difficult economic times. I would also want everyone to know that Sam has a fabulous wife. He's got a great family, 3 children, but his wife is one of my favorite people. She is the first female Speaker of the House in Tennessee and is doing a marvelous, marvelous job working to make certain that Tennessee leads the country in jobs growth. And I yield back.
I think I want to note that Congressman McKinley from West Virginia has joined us, and when we get to questions and answers, we have the opportunity to speak. Would you like to go ahead and make some comments now?
I don't know whether you got to meet Dr. Langford or not. Did he introduce himself already?
He didn't do. Go ahead and introduce him, and then when we go around, I'll just.
No, I just the one thing that when I met Dr. Langford was the difference he was making in West Virginia manufacturing. This was something that was innovative. We're well known in West Virginia for producing coal and gas and oil, but what he's taken us into a different area and with manufacturing, and I think it's part of this high-tech corridor that he's involved in bringing a very sophisticated manufacturing. To look at the aircraft that he's making, the Global Hawk, that is used to defend our troops all over the world, and it's made in West Virginia. The portions of it. So I think that he offers something that's particularly unique, and I was delighted that he had the opportunity to be here to show cutting edge and the new science of manufacturing, the use of carbon reinforced materials that we can use in our aircraft and use in surveillance and others. He's making helicopter parts, sections. His company, Aurora Flight Sciences, is I think a manifestation of where we can be as a nation if we can just focus some of our resources in the right area and make sure we support that and not ship it offshore. And I see what's happened, because let me just close with this, Brett. We've been through his plant several times, but every time is particularly unique. Each time is to go to a former coal miner working. They were able to take him up and train him, where so many people look down their nose at the coal mine industry, but to take someone and train him to be able to make some of the most sophisticated aircraft that we have in America today, and it's made from a former coal miner. All I did was some training to be able to do that. I'm very proud of it, and I'm glad that he could join us here today and give us some insight from their perspective of what it's going to take to continue that manufacturing rebuild of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll go down the list in order that I have in front of me and call on different guests to offer their remarks for 4 to 5 minutes, and then we'll open it to a complete roundtable. And if you want to just get my attention, we'll write your name down and get you in the order and the queue to speak as we move forward. But I'll introduce my friend here, Mike Baker. You said coal mining. Kentucky obviously is coal country, but my district has very little coal, almost no coal in the district. And I remember speaking to a group of coal miners who are on the cap and trade, and my comment to them is we have our jobs because you have your jobs. And Mike is with the Kentucky Aluminum Network, heavily energy intensive. Matter of fact, energy is the #1 driver of that industry. So I just toured, and he's from Hancock County, Kentucky. I just toured a plant in Hancock County that uses the same, 2,000 employees at Central Aluminum around that, and they use the same level of electricity as the city of Louisville. And so that's the energy it takes to put people to work with $12 million worth of direct impact into the area. And and so we're concerned in Kentucky about the rising costs of energy, not developing our own energy through the administration. As you know, even though we heard through the State of the Union, we're going to develop domestic energy. We're still concerned about coal and the use of coal and what it provides for us. And so I have Mr. Baker as my guest today. I'd like for him to introduce himself and give us his remarks.
Thank you, Congressman. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Mike Baker, and I am from the aluminum industry in Kentucky, specifically Hancock County, Kentucky. And we are, I believe, a little unique. Hancock County is the second, has the second highest ratio of manufacturing jobs in the country. About 68% of our jobs are manufacturing, and these are, for the most part, heavy manufacturing. We're home of Kentucky is home to 2 of the 7 smelters that are operating in the United States today, and Hancock County has one of those 2, Century Aluminum. And as the Congressman alluded, smelters, these 2 smelters are utilizing about 400 megawatts of electric power per year. And that represents about 65% of the total load on the power generator in our area. So 2 customers, granted customers that take use as much power as the city of Louisville, are taking over 60% of the load of the supplier in our area, and that's a real perfect storm that's brewing, especially when you look at some of the regulations and pending regulations about coal and about utilities. We also have a large aluminum rolling mill in the county. I was general manager of that plant for 8 years and spent 4.5 years as general manager of our Aleris aluminum rolling mill in Ohio. So my background is in heavy manufacturing, union facilities, producing products every day that are shipping all over the country. And we are really looking at what I think might be 4 fairly common challenges to industry that across the board. Obviously, energy is a major issue for us. We were talking about the smelters earlier. In the last 10 years, 12 smelters have shut down in the United States, 6 of which, Bill, we were talking earlier, in the Northwest. And those are primarily due to power rates. Most of these smelters in the Northwest found they could, at one time, aluminum's a commodity product and it's priced likewise. And at one time in the life of these smelters, they could actually sell the power back to the power generator cheaper than they could make, or more profitable than they could make the product of aluminum. And so that presented them with some fairly unique challenges. But 12 smelters have shut down in the United States. That production has moved offshore. Certainly China is playing a role in that, and I think that's an area we have to be very concerned about. Aluminum as a national security issue, that could be debated, but if we lose our capacity to produce the raw material that goes into the downstream fabrication, then I think we put ourselves in a very precarious situation. The second challenge, obviously, is environmental regulation. The aluminum industry, since 1990, has reduced fluorocarbons by 77%. Greenhouse gases have been reduced by about 56% because of some very innovative and proactive measures to ensure that they were controlling emissions. But we have to continue to look for a common sense balance to our environmental regulations as it relates to the aluminum industry. We melt scrap, so we are melting metal in furnaces, and the industry has been very proactive in meeting MAX standards when they refurbish their equipment. And so this becomes an issue in terms of cost and being able to siphon off some of the dollars going in to meet some of those compliance issues and refunnel those into R&D and innovative new ways to reduce the energy carbon sources. The third area that I would speak to is the workforce development. We're seeing this in a very significant way becoming a critical issue. We've almost got a lost generation in manufacturing with our skilled crafts. In 3 of the biggest manufacturing facilities in Hancock County, the data suggests that we are losing 42% of our skilled crafts in the next 36 months. That's our electricians, our mechanics. These are the men and women that keep these big pieces of equipment operating on a daily basis. Electrical engineers. There's a lot of conversation today about STEM research and the educational programs. We've got to continue to find ways to fill the pipeline with skilled craftspeople for our plants. Just as a quick example, this is a one ad out of the Owensboro paper, Sunday paper, for electrical specialists for the Elyris rolling mill. Now, a year ago, this one ad was about like that, but today it's this size. And every manufacturer in our region is advertising in our paper looking for electrical and mechanical craftspeople. And so that's a workforce development and what we can do to redefine education as it relates to our community and technical colleges, as it relates to the internships and the co-op programs that our industries can participate in is absolutely critical. We can solve all the other problems, but if nobody's there on Monday morning, we haven't solved the problem. And then the third area that I think manufacturing everywhere shares, certainly in our area, is our aging infrastructure. If you go down the Ohio River in the bottomlands of Hancock County where our heavy manufacturers are, these plants were primarily constructed in the early 60s. And so we're dealing with infrastructure issues right now in facilities that are 40, 45 years old. So those are 4 of the areas that I think we share some commonality across the scope of manufacturing, and so hopefully we can talk about some things today that and might shed some light on some of those solutions.
Perfect. And
Thank you.
And as I saw when I was in Hancock County just recently, when you get to the 40-year-old infrastructure and it's time to reinvest and to rebuild, these decisions we're talking about become even more important because they're at the decision-making points about where they're going to locate their businesses. Next on my list is the CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers. I know we've discussed about the skills gap and other issues, and to introduce yourself and for about 4 or 5 minutes discussion, Jay Timmons.
Sure. Thank you very much, Congressman, and thanks to the other members who are here, and thank you for your leadership on manufacturing. I am President and CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers. We are an association that represents 12,000 manufacturing companies from all across the United States, and we're the voice of 12 million manufacturing workers who every day are improving the lives of Americans and others around the world. I too have a history in manufacturing. My grandfather stood in line for over 6 months trying to get a job at the local Mead paper mill plant in Chillicothe, Ohio, because he understood, like your family did, Congressman, that manufacturing was a path to the middle class. He came in off the farm and joined the Mead paper mill during the Depression, and he was there for over 40 years, and it was what allowed my family to enter the middle class. And the same story applies to manufacturing workers and their families all across the country today and ever since manufacturing became such an important part of the American landscape. The good news is everybody is talking about manufacturing, as several have already mentioned here today, from the President of the United States to the candidates who are attempting to be the nominee against him, to incumbents in Congress and challengers as well. And even yesterday on the Super Bowl, you saw ad after ad referring to the promise and the potential of manufacturing in America. And there's a reason for this. Manufacturing is the most vital part of any economy. For every dollar that's invested, in manufacturing, another $1.35 in spin-off activity occurs, and that's the highest multiplier effect of any sector of the economy. For every manufacturing job that's created, up to 3 other jobs in other sectors of the economy are created as well. So manufacturing is a powerful driver of economic growth and job creation for this country, or frankly any country, and that's why other countries around the world are starting to understand why manufacturing is so important and why they frankly want to take our mantle of leadership away from us. Another bit of good news, of course, is the recent unemployment rate that we've seen fall. For the manufacturing sector, we added 50,000 jobs in January, and over the course of the last 13 months, we've added 235,000 manufacturing jobs. Now, while that's good news, and it's certainly a trend in the right direction, in order to get back just what we lost during the last few years during the Great Recession, it would take 10 more years of that type of growth. So we have a long way to go, and how do we break through that that seeming insurmountable hurdle? And it's really quite simple. From a manufacturing perspective, every day businesses in this country have to look at the cost of doing business in the United States. And the Manufacturing Institute, which is the educational arm of the NAM, has found, and they've done this study every couple of years for the last decade, they found that it's currently 20% more expensive to manufacture in the United States than it is anywhere else in the world among our major trading partners. And there are several drivers to that cost, but the 4 major ones are tax policy. It's no secret that we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Our regulatory cost burden, it's $1.8 trillion of regulatory burden on manufacturers. And of course, some regulations are good. We're not saying get rid of all $1.8 trillion, but an analysis of those regulations and how we can be competitive on the regulatory front around the world is critical. And on the energy front, that's another major cost driver. The good news in this front is that for the first time in our cost study, we actually have a slight cost advantage in this country right now. And our goal at the National Association of Manufacturers is to put points on the board and run that number up and not do anything that would threaten our ability to grow that sector or that important resource. And then the 4th major driver are tort costs. It's incredibly expensive to manufacturers to deal with litigation. In fact, it's 2% of our gross domestic product, and that's twice as much as any other developed country in the world. So that's a major cost driver as well. This table here today is one that we see all across the country growing and growing because more and more people do see the potential of manufacturing. They want to know what they can do and what public policymakers can do at the federal level and certainly the state level to drive down the cost of doing business in this country so that we not only attract jobs that we may have lost to pretty sharp and shrewd competitors around the world, but also to grow new jobs here in this country and create investment in manufacturing and to grow the manufacturing economy. Thank you very much for the time and the opportunity to be here today, and happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much. And Chairwoman Bono Mack has already introduced Liat Tala, so I'll just turn it over to you for your 5 minutes.
Thanks. Hello, my name is Liat Tala. I'm a clothing manufacturer in California. I've been in the garment industry for 11 years. It's a family business. My father has been producing clothing in the United States for the last 20 years. I recently brought back my manufacturing from China to California for various reasons. I share a lot of the different ideas that have been already presented at the table and would like to speak about them some more. So I appreciate people already touching on a few of the subjects that have been our challenges in bringing manufacturing back. There have been a lot of challenges, and there have also been some parts that we want to keep the same. So we don't want to neglect things that do work, but we also want to adjust the things that don't work. And I'm excited and honored to be here today.
Thank you. Now, from Bill Holt from Intel, he's the General Manager, Technology and Manufacturing Group.
Good afternoon.
Probably want to use the mic. They're live streaming. So.
Okay. All right, see if I can do this. My name is Bill Holt. Thank you for having me here this afternoon. I am with Intel Corporation. I joined Intel. I'll also do a little bit of history. I joined Intel in 1974, and I've been with the company ever since. So I've seen much of the transition over those years as well. I joined right out of college as an engineer, and I still like to think of myself as an engineer today, though my job clearly is not engineering anymore. That's still what my roots are, and that's still how I think of the work that we do. Today I co-manage the Technology and Manufacturing Group for Intel, which is responsible for all of our manufacturing as well as the development of our new technologies. My focus is on the research and development side. My partner really runs the manufacturing operation. And our goal in that area is to maintain the improvement that we do to technology, which is often referred to as maintaining Moore's Law. We like to joke, this is not really a law of physics. It's an observation that was made by one of Intel's founders back in 1965, that the improvement that we could make in technology would provide a cost reduction. It was an economic observation in reality, but would provide a cost reduction of almost 2x in the fundamental building block of our technology, which is making transistors, and we could do that roughly every 2 years. And maintaining that is the focus of our research and development, because that's what keeps our manufacturing competitive. That means we have interest not only in those things that affect manufacturing costs, but also R&D, and I'll comment on that in a little while. For Intel, we have an interesting situation where almost 3/4 of our manufacturing is still in the U.S., but a full 3/4 of our sales are actually outside the U.S. So while most of our manufacturing is still done in this country, almost all of our business is done outside the country. And so in addition to the manufacturing-related factors that we'll talk about today, trade policy is also very important for us, as most of our business is in fact overseas. An additional fact is that 80% of the research dollars that we spend, and Intel spent almost $8 billion on research last year, and we'll spend more this year, 80% of that is spent inside the U.S. at research and development facilities here, even though, again, almost all of our production is outside. And the final point along those lines is in the area of capital and building new plants and equipment. Because of the rapid pace of technology, it's essential that we upgrade our factories on a regular basis. I'll make a few comments about our capital, but 2/3 of the capital that we invest is invested in the United States, again, with 3/4 of the actual sales being outside. In 2009, we announced that we would be spending $7 billion upgrading factories, that time in Oregon and in Arizona. That had the effect of producing about 7,000 construction-related jobs. Now, that really was necessary to maintain Intel jobs. We're not creating new jobs there, we're just maintaining them. But you see the amount of investment that we have to make, and therefore capital-intensive in industry that we really are. In 2010, we announced we would spend $6 to $8 billion, again, upgrading factories. This time, we would be producing about 6,000 new construction jobs for the duration of that upgrade, and now increasing the Intel employment by 1,000 or so people. But again, a very large upgrade to our factories in order to provide us the manufacturing ability. And last year, we announced that we'd be spending about $5 billion to build a new factory in Arizona, again, to increase our manufacturing base. I have to say a few words about tax policy. Everybody has. Intel is one of the largest taxpayers in the country. We paid $4.5 billion in federal taxes last year. So tax policy is obviously important to us. Our tax rate is about 29%. That's higher than all of our foreign competitors. That makes it difficult for the company because we are basically starting at a disadvantage. I mentioned research and development. We spend a lot of money on research and development, and so making and dealing with the research tax credit is very important to Intel. Right now, as I said, 80% of our research and development is in the U.S., but that's not permanent. It doesn't have to stay here. We have facilities elsewhere where that could take place. So dealing with that and making it something that one can depend on is an important tax policy. When we look at siting new factories, I think there are some points that are probably worth understanding. For us, putting a new factory in place costs about $5 billion. That's about what we'll spend on this new factory in Arizona. And there's lots of factors that go into that. One, proximity to other existing Intel facilities. So the fact that we have a large manufacturing base in the country, that does help in making that decision. A skilled workforce is also important, and obviously we have a skilled workforce that we've developed. And so maintaining that skilled workforce is critical. But unfortunately, tax policies and government incentives have put a big disadvantage to us in siting those factories. The Semiconductor Industry Association did a study looking at the 10-year cost of siting one of those factories in the U.S. versus overseas in one of the new and emerging markets. And for a $10 billion cost over 10 years, it will cost approximately $1 billion more for us to site that factory in the U.S. than somewhere else. And that is not labor. Our business is not terribly labor intensive. That is driven by tax policy, by incentives that those governments provide in terms of actually paying and giving dollars to help offset some of the capital cost, and then in many cases giving 10-year tax holidays where there are in fact no local taxes on that new industry as an incentive. So the challenge before us is that while we continue to site factories in the U.S., each time we do that, we theoretically are taking $1 billion hit on what it's going to cost us to run that factory over the next 10 years. And these are some of the things that are really important for us to begin to address. So what we really need is a holistic manufacturing, tax, and trade strategy that allows us to continue to be competitive. We can produce the technology. We can be a world leader in this space. But to maintain that in the U.S., we do need a consistent and a progressive policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that very much. And next we'll have Susan Dudley. She's the former head of OMB's Office of ORA, Regulations, and founder of the Regulatory Studies Institute at George Washington University.
Yes, thank you, Congressman. Yes, I'm not a manufacturer, and I actually never have been, except maybe between years of college. I did a little dabbling. I direct the Regulatory Studies Center at GW, and I've spent a lot of my life looking at regulations, which can be pretty lonely. If you tell people you do study regulations, their eyes start to glaze over. But as we've heard around the table, regulations really are a very important policy tool, but they're a lot less understood than spending programs paid for by taxes, because the effects of regulation, the outcomes and the costs are not as transparent. We don't have a budget process. Congress doesn't appropriate funds for new regulations each year. So while we know that regulations affect the costs of doing business, they affect the price of consumer goods, and they alter the mix of things that we can buy, we really don't have a good way of tracking either the growth in regulation or the real effects on the economy of regulation. So Congress will pass legislation and giving agencies authority to write regulations, and that authority can be very sweeping. And all presidents have taken advantage of that sweeping authority that they have. So we have seen an increase in the number, the scope, and the impact of regulation since at least the 1970s. And once they're in place, they're hard to undo, once a regulation's in place. There is a concern that the current pace of regulatory activity has increased. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce refers to it as a regulatory tsunami. President Obama, in his State of the Union address a couple of weeks ago, denied that. He said, "I've approved fewer regulations in the first 3 years of my presidency than my Republican predecessor did in his." That's technically true if you look at a raw count of regulations issued. But the rules that have been issued over the last 3 years have had much larger impact. If you look at the rules that agencies estimate will have an impact of $100 million or more per year, President Obama has issued 40% more in his first 3 years than President Bush did in his, and 30% more than President Clinton in his first 3 years. And some of these we measure in the billions of dollars, like the Utility Act rule that Mr. Baker mentioned. Now, some of that increase in activity is due to new legislation, the Dodd-Frank bill and the health care bill, but also due to new interpretations of statutes that have been on the books for a long time, like the Clean Air Act. Agencies will say, but don't worry about just the cost of regulations, because the benefits, by our estimates, the benefits far exceed the costs. But I think we need to take that with a grain of salt, because the costs of regulations are tangible. That's the cost of complying. That's money that you can't spend to hire another employee to make a new investment, or as a consumer you can't spend it to buy a new coat. Whereas the modeled benefits are less tangible. They don't translate into anything that's measurable by the gross domestic product or observable in the economy. And I would say even as a measure of human health and welfare, at least some of these measures, these benefit estimates are seriously flawed. I will agree with what Jay Timmons said, that for an economy to work efficiency, we need rules. We need rules of the road. But I think the concern is that this constant churning of regulations leads to uncertainty, which is one of the things one of the big quadrants of that pie up there, and diverts energy from creating products and jobs to trying to influence the details of the regulations and efforts to comply with this increasingly complex code of regulations. So I really welcome discussions like this, and I welcome the fact that Congress is considering several reform bills that might turn this tide. And again, the objective of these bills is not to eliminate all regulation, but to ensure that they address a compelling public need and end up making American citizens better off.
Thank you. Since you point out to the pie chart, I'll just kind of comment to it. That is from the Harvard Business School. They did a survey of all their alumni that they had email databases for. So it's every Harvard Business School alumni graduate, most of them in senior level, and if not CEO positions. And I can get the details of the number if you would like. And these are things that make your decision of whether to be onshore or offshore. And as you see, we talked earlier, regulations and then talent also was big, but only 30% of that was cost of talent. The rest, if you look through it, would be availability of talent more than just going for the cheapest wage. It was actually the ability to have somebody to perform the work that they wanted. But that's what that refers to. And the other one is, where do you think we're going in the future? And obviously, where are we now? Where are we going in the future? And they feel like our universities, entrepreneurship, and firm management's moving forward. But where they think we're deteriorating is our legal framework, regulation, tax code, our education system, and our political system was noted in that, just to bring those forward. Since people are already looking at those, I'll explain what those are in some more detail. Next will be Dr. John Langford. He's with the CEO, has been introduced by Congressman McKinley of Aurora Flight Sciences.
Great, thank you. Congressman Guthrie and Congressman McKinley and other members of the committee, it's a great honor to be here. My name is John Langford, as it said. I'm the CEO of Aurora Flight Sciences Corporation. We are a small business. We have about 400 employees, primarily located in West Virginia and in Columbus, Mississippi. We are an aircraft manufacturer, primarily in the unmanned aircraft space, the robotic aircraft space. And we have been in business for a little over 22 years. So we consider ourselves still a startup in this business, which is dominated by the very large corporations and by significant international competition, most of which is financed by their governments. As such, we have grown up in a business where there's a heavy government component to what we do. We work a lot for NASA and for the Department of Defense, and so research and development is clearly a big driver. The DoD has been the primary user of these robotic aircraft over the last 12 years or so, since 9/11 really marked an inflection point in the manufacture and utilization of these robotic airplanes, much the way Pearl Harbor marked an inflection point in the manufacture and use of manned airplanes in the history of the U.S. But there is a very significant civil market and scientific market for these airplanes lying in the future, and there is a rapidly growing international market in both the defense and in the civil applications of that. So to touch briefly on what works and what are some of the challenges that we observe over the years. Well, I think one of the great things, and it's been commented on, starting with Congresswoman Mack and others, the enthusiasm for entrepreneurship is something that is really different in this country today from 20 or 25 years ago. It's very tangible. It's been remarked on by the president and all of the candidates. And I think it's incredibly healthy for the country because people need to have an enthusiasm for the kind of manufacturing is hard, and there's a lot of challenges to it, and it's important that the country celebrate it and aspire to it. I think that the network of state and local support that this country provides is very positive. This is one of those cases where having 50 states is good. They compete against each other. They help drive, they have different interests, but they help drive the entrepreneurial spirit, and they help drive the manufacturing rebirth that the country is experiencing. And I think that's good. We have benefited particularly from training initiatives in both West Virginia and in Mississippi, in infrastructure development such as facilities and help with loans for equipment and things like that. The two biggest things we look for in siting a facility, quite frankly, are airports and universities. In putting both of our plants in, those are the top two things. Do they have a healthy airport, and is there a strong university nearby? If you have those two things, you have a lot of the community support and forward thinking that goes into making any business a success, and those are particularly things that we look for. The other, which I would commend to all of the members of the committee, is the Small Business Innovative Research Program. It was recently reauthorized by Congress. It's about a 30-year-old program, but when I talk to colleagues around the world, the thing that they are most amazed by the United States is that your government will give you money to start a business, and the answer is yeah. It's a competitively awarded program, intensely competitively awarded, with many gates, but it is a program that has stood the test of time. Our company has benefited from this, and so have thousands of other businesses in this country. So that's something that works. We spend a lot of time talking about things that don't work, but that's a program that is fantastic, and I'm very pleased that Congress has reauthorized it and hope it will continue. In terms of some of the challenges that we look at, access to capital is certainly the number one. I mentioned that in the aerospace, most of the competition is from overseas companies that are literally owned by their governments. It's a high technology job creator, and foreign governments recognize that, and they want to be in on that. And part of the price of access to foreign markets is making sure that they get all of them make sure that they get a piece of the action, and it's one of the big things of developing both in offsets and in direct manufacturing participation. I think if you look at Aurora and a company like Boeing, the biggest difference between us, and there's certainly lots of them, but one of the biggest is our cost of capital. A company like Boeing or Lockheed probably can get money at around 3%, and a small business like ours is well into the double digits. And so that's a built-in disadvantage that we have to go into in any competitive situation. Is the direct cost of capital in that? I think a big driver in the country's success has been our willingness over the last 100 years to invest in aeronautical research and development. And so in particular, the programs that NASA has, I know that's not a direct purview of this committee today, but the support for the research and development enterprise is one of the ways that the United States can continue to compete against foreign-owned or directly subsidized foreign competitors. And finally, in terms of regulations, we certainly are handicapped by, we certainly have regulations that we care about that impact us, but they're maybe not the ones that people typically think of. The two biggest areas that we face challenges are in terms of flying, opening up the airspace in the United States to these robotic aircraft is a big challenge with the FAA. There are currently no provisions to do that on any kind of routine basis. I know Congress in the recent reauthorization has taken steps to address that. It's going to take continued congressional pressure, and it's an area that has to be taken very seriously and very carefully because all these regulations have pros and cons, right? I mean, they're not put there without good reason. And when you go to change them, particularly ones that are safety-based regulations like the FAA is involved in, we shouldn't do that lightly. The last one was export controls, which is something that again is tied directly to national security, but is probably the biggest single challenge that we face in working to increase our exports, both directly as a company and as getting as a subcontractor onto other coalitions of companies, particularly outside the United States. A lot of companies in our business don't want to deal with an American partner because of the uncertainty that has put in by the export control regulations that the country has. Again, good reasons to have export controls, but it's a real barrier to participating in the world market, largely because it creates this uncertainty in dealing with American companies that many of our foreign competitors don't face. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. I understand that we all hear each other pretty well, but the webcast is being difficult, so make sure you have your mic in front of you when you speak directly, if we can. And I'm the one that's guilty more than any, I've been told, so we're all, we'll speak into the mic. Next, and we have one more, and then we'll get into our full round table, is Sam Harwell, who's been introduced by Congresswoman Blackburn, President and CEO of Big Time Toys.
Thank you. And Marcia, thank you very much for the nice things you said about my wife, Beth. I guess I first need to make sure that everybody knows that it's much harder to marry above yourself than it is to start and run a business. Well, anyway, Big Time Toys, we have 16 employees in Nashville, and we make and create and sell our own brands of products to U.S. retailers, Canadian retailers, and other distributors throughout the world, probably in around 10 to 20 other countries, varying year to year. In Nashville, we have product development, sales, marketing, accounting, and operations. And we do assemble our products outside the U.S. and China. I guess part of the reason I'm here today, I feel like that manufacturing is hugely important, but I believe that that's more of a result of commerce in general. If we want to grow manufacturing in America, we need to foster U.S. businesses' ability to compete worldwide and even in the U.S. and not make it difficult. Right now it has become difficult. I guess if I could summarize my thoughts on government's involvement or your help, it would be, first of all, leave us alone because there are too many regulations. Taxes are too complicated. Health care should be easier than it is. And we have not been left alone, and these are the results. I think about flying up here, I realized how used to I have gotten to having two accountants. I've got one for my business and then one for taxes. He does my taxes. And I add up all the last 10 or 15 years of paying that tax. Now, I don't have a tax accountant. He just does my form. If I added up all the money for the last 10 or 15 years that I've paid him, I could hire someone for 2 or 3 years as another employee to maybe find another toy that might grow our company. Regulations have been a big problem in our industry. One very simple example, first of all, everybody in the toy industry is for safe toys. We wouldn't be in business, we can't stay in business if we don't make safe toys. And so we're for a degree of safety testing. But there's so much redundancy. Here's an example. This is a $10 toy called Soccer Boppers. And every year we have to test, which we should. It costs around $2,000 or $3,000 for a safety test. This one was done by Intertech. And this year we have had to do 7 of the same tests, all at $1,500 to $2,000 a piece, exactly like the first one. because things have, gotten out of control. 5, 6 years ago, the previous Congress passed a lot of unclear rules and regulations about how to make sure our toys are safe, and it has resulted in a lot of inefficiencies. Now, this just makes it harder to compete. I want to make more toys. I want to hire more people, but when we have to it's not just about the money, it's also about the distraction. So it's not just regulations, taxes. Everybody wants their taxes to be lower. I'm not even saying that, I guess I would say that they really just shouldn't be higher than other countries. And Mr. Holt has spoken to the fact that they are a lot higher than in a lot of other countries, and that puts us at a disadvantage. But then they're so complicated. Healthcare, we use an HSA insurance in my business, which has been very helpful compared to the alternative. But nothing's happened with that in years. I can't even go across. I just was told a month ago that our rates are up, and we have very few companies we can go to get other prices. We can't go outside of Tennessee to do that. And it seems as if you can buy a lot of things, and that you can shop a lot of places when there's a lot of competition, and there's no competition right now. So anyway, I'm not here to complain. I want to help, and so I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much. So the safety of that, I wish my big brother had soccer boppers when I was growing up. Looks like it would have made his blows a little better than the bare knuckles that I experienced quite frequently. But anyway, well, thanks so much. And I just want to start with this, with Let probably is one of my favorite politicians ever is Jack Kemp, and he used to say, well, let's not study failure, let's study success and see how we can replicate it. And if you would just take us through, and I love the name of your Kentucky Denim, great name for your jeans. But what was your decision? Why did you went to Mexico, I understand, and then what factors led you there, and then what factors led you back?
Sure. When I started my denim company, it was at the height. Yeah, it's on. It was at the height of premium denim. I was able to do all my processes in Los Angeles. We had the economies of scale to do everything from research and development, design, and cutting the fabric, all the way to distributing it out of our facility. When the recession started and the economy for premium denim started to go down a little bit, it became a lot more competitive to compete producing our garment in the U.S., which was one of the reasons we moved it overseas to China. We saved enough money to be able to continue to stay in business and to cater to our customers who still wanted to buy the product, but not at the same cost as before the recession. What we noticed, one of the challenges of working overseas is quality control. Unless you have someone there babysitting your production the entire time, it's...
Was the advantage of going to China the labor cost directly?
Absolutely.
That was the number one without any question.
Number one is the labor cost, and I think one of the things that makes it really challenging to produce in the United States is not only what you're paying for the employee, but the insurance that you're paying around it, and trying to protect yourself from frivolous lawsuits as well. All of it kind of go hand in hand. But I do believe that today the U.S. employees are in a different position than where they were before the recession. A lot of them are willing to learn new trade skills, which is one of the reasons why we also decided to bring it back. So the reasons for going there at the time made a lot of sense. When we noticed that the quality can never get to where we wanted it to be, and that the price of importing the garment was going up due to the rise of fuel costs, we decided that ultimately we wanted to bring our products back to the U.S., and we specifically searched for an area that had high levels of unemployment so that we could bring jobs back to the area that needed it the most. We found a very great location in the Coachella Valley. We're currently located in Thousand Palms. We do training seminars. We taught our entire workforce how to turn on a sewing machine. Nobody even knew any part of the process. and we were able within a 4-week span to get them up to an output level that what we figured would be appropriate level at the 4th week. So we hit our number, and we were very proud of that. So far, our experience of being in our Thousand Palms location, we have learned that the workforce is willing to learn a new trade set if they are properly trained, which goes hand in hand with the Workforce Development Center. Somebody else mentioned something about the Workforce Development Center, and my experience with it has been mixed. I think that there's a lot of rules with workforce development that make it hard sometimes to employ from the specific areas. I would like to address some of those challenges that we had with Workforce Development Center, such as not being able to employ an employee until they're fully signed and contracted with the workforce. Sometimes it makes it hard to begin the training process. That could put you at a setback of about 2 weeks, when in manufacturing, that's a significant amount of time. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you very much. And then I'm just kind of open to whoever wants to, but before anybody, members or guests, but for Bill, I have just one on. We're looking at your decision was labor costs. Yours appears to be, from what I've read about Intel, is and you said the $1 billion difference. A lot of that are foreign governments' direct investment, as you said.
They are, or else.
Where they say, if you come to this province or this area, we'll build you a building. We'll give, almost like states do to each other when we compete for major manufacturing companies that are looking at states. Is that and what? I mean, I don't see that the United States is going to go build buildings for folks. So what kind of things can alleviate that pressure?
I don't think that Intel's looking to have you build a building for us. Right. But even the foreign governments don't contribute that amount of money. The biggest things that they do is the fact that they do have lower corporate tax rates. Mm-hmm. So that means that is.
Is that part of your $1 billion? Okay. That's
and they do provide entire tax holidays for a new plant. If you put a new plant in some countries, they will basically exempt it from taxes for X number of years. And so that's a big factor in offsetting the initial cost.
Okay. I was thinking the $1 billion was the direct investment. It's tax code.
No, they don't.
We
they
can
don't
address
give us that much money. There are some. I mean, we will get grants in the hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes, but that's probably not the biggest factor.
Okay.
Right, Congressman Guthrie, if I could just interject there.
They still we need to, because of the webcasting, we really need to be.
So the 20% figure that I talked about, the 20% cost disadvantage, goes directly to your question. So when you're looking at taxes or regulation or energy costs or tort costs, that 20% disadvantage does not even include the cost of labor that Liat was talking about. So that's a whole different number that could be added on to that. But we really just focus on the 20% number, the disadvantage cost that Congress and the administration can address. And to Bill's point, the corporate tax rate or the effective tax rate really is a major driver of that cost differential. But all those other factors go into it as well. And those are things that we've actually done to ourselves. Those are not things that other countries have done to us, but they're things that we've actually done to ourselves through public policy.
Thanks. I think Congressman Blackburn, you want to go first and then you want to go next?
No, go ahead.
Thank you. And I just want to first ask Sam, this past August, this subcommittee had a huge success with passing CPSC relief, if you would. Can you speak a little bit about, have you noticed that effect immediately? And, we keep talking about regulations and being good. We need them, but there's a point at which they're obviously worse than helpful. CPSC, we passed it on a bipartisan basis. We have before. But to Susan, too, to kind of jump in here a little bit, it's sad to see that the political system is in the lowest quadrant of the chart up here, but we certainly all understand why it is. The CPSC, though, the bill that we did in August was a great example of bipartisanship, and we don't always necessarily agree. And there's a political reality here that the House and the Senate, majorities come and go and feelings come and go. But when you do your analysis, Susan, do you look at the political makeup and then decide where we can, in fact, find common ground the way we did with the Consumer Product Safety Commission bill that we passed in August? The Democrats weren't 100% happy with it. We weren't 100% happy with it. And I bet you the American people would say that it's probably right. it's probably just right. So to both of you, did that help? And do you look at, in fact, opportunities like this with a mixed political makeup to find something that we can do that's sort of gradient along on improvements? So,
yeah, it was very helpful. It fixed some things that were broken, extremely broken about the law that was passed I guess 4 or 5 years ago. And we do appreciate that, there's no doubt. I guess we all agree that the regulation that occurred before that was still in place, caused a lot of problems. And you all fixed it, so thanks. That's your question.
yeah, I just was looking for accolades. No, no, it really was. I think lawmakers don't always hear, yes, it worked. And we also don't always hear that was awful, it was a terrible idea, fix it. And so it's good to hear, yeah, at the end of the day, it mattered and it made a difference. So I just want to make sure. And then also,
right, I'll give you a quick example to let you know I'm sincere with the thank you. If there's a dot of paint on a doll's eye, white paint, there used to verify there was no lead there, they used to have to take hundreds of dolls to scrape all the paint off that one dot just to get enough paint to test. And now, in your amendment, among other things, added some reasonableness to that. Of course, the lead test still needs to be met. However, that kind of testing, which is a complete waste of money, it has been, for example, alleviated. And I think there were problems with lead on the handlebars of 4x4s and stuff like that. You all fixed those things. It was a big help.
well, but you did say you had to do 7 tests on the same toy. So it's still continuing. And I guess there's nobody who just pick up the phone and say, this is crazy. Is there any common sense anywhere in Washington?
Well, I don't know if that answer might be in Washington somewhere, that those tests are not necessary, but I think there's so much fear related to those regulations there that were passed 4 or 5 years ago that were a little bit out of control. And the fear is there with the retailers who are also importers. And so these tests one is for Walmart, one is for Target, one is for Toys R Us, and they are all so scared they want to do their own tests. And so you could say, well, maybe the answer is for the CPSC to say to Walmart, Target, Toys R Us, and all the others, you can accept it and you're off the hook. Not off the hook to sell unsafe toys, but off the hook to rely on a test by a lab that's certified. But when there's when people are unsure about whether they're following the law or the rule or the regulation, they're going to double up, and that's what's happened here. So there's lack of clarity still.
Thank you.
I probably should describe my center a little bit more at the beginning, but it's a center within the university, and we focus on the regulations themselves, so less on the legislation, and we don't suggest legislation. That's kind of outside of our purview. But that being said, there is an interest in regulatory reform legislation, and I do see bipartisan interest in changing, in broad cross-cutting. I think something like that. There are certain statutes that it really would make sense to go and fix the statute the way you address that. In cross-cutting legislation, there are efforts to affect the decision criteria that agencies use, so that let's really understand what effects this regulation will have before we impose it on people and make sure it really will do more good than harm. And then there are also procedural mechanisms that just provide a little more of the checks and balances. And I see bipartisan interest in both of those types of reforms.
I kind of saw that as the process kind of working in a way that I wasn't here when the first set of rules were put into place, laws put in place, but I know what it was spawned from was an issue of imported toys. And so then, so laws were passed and regulations put into place, and all of a sudden, people were being affected and started contacting their member of Congress. I remember, I guess, a lady, I think, from Washington State that made homemade dolls that was going to be put out of business because she couldn't test, and that wasn't what I think most people finally looked around and said, that's not what we intended to happen out of this. We wanted to protect people from stuff being imported, and the process as well. And through the leadership of our chairman here, I mean, it really, her leadership putting it together and forging it to move forward. But it was like grassroots manufacturing. I'm sure you talked to Congressman Blackburn, didn't you, when that was going forward? But anyway, I'll call on Marcia.
Thank you so much. And yes, we're glad to hear when things work, but we also want to look at getting some more of those regulations off the books. I want to go back to the issue of workforce development and education. And Mike, you used a term I think is so important, that as we look at building a workforce, and primarily this is something at our local and state level, and as we're meeting with local officials, economic development officials, they bring it forward regularly. But the community engagement component that is there, and you touched on that, but I think it's so important. I recall when my father-in-law, who was an old Texas Aggie electrical engineer, and he was in Fort Worth, Texas, and he needed to have some more electrical technicians that were going to work with his company. So he went over to Tarrant County Junior College and started a program that would train these electrical journeymen and technicians, and taught in that program. And he would tell stories about the importance of that. And then through my public life, I've worked with different groups in Tennessee with our junior college system. So I would like to hear from you if there's anything that you're doing tangibly or what you think is most effective. And then as we look at funding the workforce program, what would be more helpful? And Liat, I think hearing from you, since you've just gone through it, you talked about the delay, the paperwork delay, and we're always, I made a note on that specifically, because the turnaround time should not be 2 weeks. It should be 20 minutes. Somebody sitting at a computer filling out a form, and that's something that when we look at that again, I'm going to remember that. So I thank you for that suggestion. But Mike, I'd love to hear about that a little more from you.
Thank you. I'm glad you asked that question. It gives us a chance to talk a little bit about a program that we're very proud of in Hancock County. And as I stated earlier, our community is heavy manufacturing. That it's agriculture and heavy manufacturing. Plants built in the river bottoms of the Ohio River there. And because of the nature, these are plants with 45 acres under roof, 24/7 operations, 700 employees. At one time, the plant I had was approaching 900 employees. And these would have a staff of 200 industrial mechanics or electricians. And for most of those jobs, that requires a 3-year apprenticeship. And a lot of those jobs come off the production floor. The production employees bid into the maintenance jobs and become your skilled craftsmen. And today, that 3-year window is, we're running out of people. And in our community, local leaders for the past decade have gone to Frankfurt and asked for money to build a vocational school, because that 3-year apprenticeship requires both in-class and in-shop training and classwork. Well, there's never been enough money for the bricks and mortar projects to build a vocational school. Well, 2 years ago, as this problem continued to grow, we went, and I say we, various contingencies of the community, economic development, industry leaders, we went to Frankfurt to solicit money because we were going to put a vocational school or a branch of our local community college in an old vacant bank building in our shopping center. And this shopping center was centrally located right on Highway 60, so it was 3 to 5 miles from a couple of our biggest plants. These mechanical employees were driving about 30 miles to attend these skilled crafts classes in the college. We took that old bank building, renovated it. We rented it for $75,000 a year. We used coal severance tax money to fund that. The city of Lewisport, which has about 1,300 people in it, donated $35,000 to operate that facility for the course of the year, heating bills, that type of thing, routine maintenance. And so today, because of the cooperation of the community and just good old willpower, we were able to put that branch of the community college there in the proximity of those plants. Now those employees drive 3 to 5 miles, and they can take their 2-hour electrical class or 1-hour mechanical class and go back to work. And I'll never forget it after we got it open. And being an ex-plant manager, I had to deal with that. And the situation was that many times we would waive the time and tier requirements to get an electrician out on the floor earlier because of just the need. But I stopped in there one day, and there were 3 mechanical students, but these were guys that worked at the local paper mill. And I said, "How's this working?" And they said, "This building has allowed me to have dinner with my children." And, you know, that was a major issue for those employees. But the other part of that was, in that same sentence, they turned around and praised their company. They were so proud of their company for participating in that project.
Let me ask you this, too. What did it do to their wage rates?
What it does to their wage rates, when they go from a production job to an electrical skill or a mechanical skill, it increases. Those are the top.
Do you have an idea of what the percentage increase in that wage rate is?
You go from $20 an hour to $28.
Got it. Okay. Whoops.
Now that's full seniority rolled up with all the qualifications, but it's a significant increase. But the point is, we were looking at how we could solve problems, old problems, in a different way. We knew we couldn't get the public money for the bricks and mortars, so we took an existing resource and a little bit of ingenuity and a lot of cooperation by all of the stakeholders in the community. Everybody had the same agenda, and we were able to solve a problem in a little bit more creative way. And I think we've got great opportunities to do that on a bigger scale. Now, the second part of that story is, last year, the Hancock County School Board purchased that shopping center. And I would dare say they're probably the only school board in the United States that's in the pizza business and the IGA grocery business and the video business. They bought that shopping center because in the back of that shopping center there's 5 vacant stores. And they're perfect for classrooms. And the technology is available today to move welding units in there that you don't have to spend a lot of money renovating. They have the contained hoods, and you can set up welding classes inside one of those classrooms. But the school board bought it so that they could have access to those extra spaces. And so now, in cooperation with the local school district, the local community college, we're able to offer a wider range of classes, both technical and general education classes, right there in the community. So I think that's a great example of some innovative things we can do that maybe allows us to use the money and the funds we do have available in a little bit more creative way.
I think in Kentucky, typically in Kentucky, you'll see from the unskilled to the skilled trades from the low teens. I know y'all are a little higher in some of the factories to low 20s. There's a difference in getting by and having a middle class life. Do you need the mic? We're streaming on TV. Yes, you need the mic.
When your earlier remarks, you gave me the impression that you had some knowledge of the aluminum industry.
Yes.
And knowing how dependent, well, I don't want to set the stage right on. So with that experience and all this issue of here in Congress about dealing with inflating increasing the cost of electricity? Because we've been told, many people have said on the floor that our utility costs are nowhere near what they are in Europe, and therefore we shouldn't have a problem getting our utility bills higher, because if Europe can do that, why can't we be paying higher? What effect would that have on the aluminum industry that requires such a great surge of power to those anodes to turn that into liquid aluminum? So could you share a little bit about the effect of higher utility bills on the manufacturing industry?
Yes, sir. Our industry, and as I said earlier, we've got a bit of a perfect storm brewing in our area. We have 2 smelters in the state of Kentucky, one in Hancock County in our area. These smelters use 400 megawatts of power a year. About 30% of the cost of operating a smelter is electrical power. My part of the business, the rolling business, we had 28 melters with capacities of 75 to 100,000 pounds of molten aluminum that we fueled with natural gas to melt the scrap. But in the smelter industry, where you have a process that reduces the aluminum, the pure aluminum, out of alumina powder, and that process is triggered by tremendous voltages of electricity into a salt bath that separates the aluminum. At 30% of your operating cost, any increase is significant to that business. The price of aluminum, it's a commodity price. It has varied from as low as 90 cents a couple of weeks ago to a high of $1.26 a pound in April of 2011. And so the margins for the aluminum industry and in the smelting business are very minimal to begin with. But when you look at that level of cost for power, any increase could have a very devastating effect on the future of that smelter.
So how would you help us argue that case, that because many people on the other side of the aisle, unfortunately, are saying it's okay to increase the price of it? How can we do a better job? Because we're losing that fight, it seems.
Right. Well, first of all, if you look basically, the average wage in an aluminum primary smelter today is about $62,000 annual. You take a benefit package of about $35,000. These are high-paying jobs.
High school graduates, right?
High school graduates, in many cases. So when you talk about, as Congressman Guthrie said earlier, about the standard of living, 50% of the graduates of Hancock County High School don't go to college. That's our workforce. And when you look at that kind of wage and you look at the impact, these 2 smelters on their 2 counties generate, about $13 million a year in just property taxes, school taxes, occupational taxes. So to make the case that it's okay to just let the utility rates go up, what do we do with the 700 employees when those smelters shut down? And I'm talking 700 employees that are making these kind of wages in our communities. The impact. In the state of Kentucky, there's about 13,000 aluminum jobs right now. Those 13,000 jobs are paying anywhere from $80 to $90 million in state and local taxes. We believe it's a signature industry in Kentucky. The economic impact of aluminum ranks right up there with bourbon and thoroughbred horses and coal. So it is a critical industry to the fabric of the economy of the state of Kentucky. And other areas too. In Indiana, Warwick County is another smelter. So within, 50-mile radius, 3 of the 7 smelters operating in this country are right there. We've also got a power situation where these two smelters occupy over 60% of the load of that utility. That utility serves 122,000 customers, two of which are smelters, and those two customers, those two smelters, take over 60% of their load. If you raise the utility rates on these two smelters and they go dark, that cost is going to be spread over those little white houses all around southern India or western Kentucky. So the picture of losing another smelter on top of the 12 we've lost in the last 10 years does not bode well for our area or for the country. And
Marshall wants to ask you a question.
sure.
Not on that. I'm sorry. I thought you were finishing on that. I had a question on something else.
But does that help? I don't know. We know what's being done in some other states. Some states have put funds out there to offset the electrical increases. Some have passed legislation that exempted the aluminum smelters from increases through their public service commissions. So there's a number of things that some states are doing. West Virginia, for one, and with the Ravenswood smelter.
Ravenswood, Ormet, along the river. But this week we have some legislation coming up that's going to affect it. Utility Act. That's going to be. But I don't know whether the American public yet is aware of the impact of some of these regulations are going to cause increasing the price of electricity and what it's going to do to our manufacturing. So I'm very alarmed about it because we're not getting the message out. So we need people like you and the manufacturers. They've got to help us make sure our people are aware that increased cost is going to drive our businesses away from America, and again, past that cost is going to go on to the consumer. But I've got to find a way to argue the case where they say, but if the utility costs are okay in Europe, they should be okay in America.
Congressman, if
That's
I could
not-
just add one point to that. Yeah, so that's a very specific example, and there are thousands of those examples all over the country. But if you take more 30,000-foot look at it, and I think it's the issue that you're talking about, Utility Act is a great example of driving up the cost of doing business in this country, adding to that 20% cost differential. And there's a very specific reason for that. Manufacturers are the largest consumers of energy in the country. Manufacturers consume 30%, a third of this nation's energy output. It is usually, if it's not labor costs, energy costs are going to be the number one cost for any business to undertake in this country. So it is a matter of, if you're driving up the cost of energy, you, yes, could be losing jobs to other countries, but in the supply chain where you have smaller manufacturers, they don't have the ability to go anywhere else. They just fold and they go out of business. And those small companies could have been in business for decades, and we lose it because, again, of our own policies. So when the President talks about an all-of-the-above approach, he's exactly right. We need to develop and we need to encourage the development of all types of energy, not the least of which, of course, is the coal industry, which is one of the most economic means for producing energy in this country, ensuring that we have the ability to develop the shale fields that are being discovered all over this country, and taking advantage of every single type of energy there is, and helping to provide certainty. So we're talking now about the production tax credit for wind power in this country, and there may be debates about whether it's important or appropriate to prioritize one form of energy over another. It's appropriate to develop all types of energy in this country because manufacturers depend on it.
So would having a national energy policy help manufacturing?
Absolutely. And this country has struggled for decades to develop a coherent energy policy or any energy policy at all. It was a hot topic of conversation in the last administration. The last administration didn't develop one. This administration hasn't developed one. I believe it needs to come from the executive branch, and Congress needs to embrace it. But in the absence of one from the executive branch, then Congress should probably develop one itself. And if some of those facts that I just mentioned, the 30% number, are contained in this document, A Manufacturing Renaissance, 4 Goals for Economic Growth. And I've had a lot of questions from members of Congress about what are some of these data points that go into a successful manufacturing economy. And if you don't want to read the whole document, this little tear-out page right here will give you all the facts, point by point.
That'll make for your pocket. Sam, you had something. We'll get to.
Yeah, just one other argument you might have there is that one of our advantages through the many, many years as a country has been our resources. Our natural resources are much less than many, many other countries, including and especially China. They've had to go all over the world to find minerals and other types of aluminum and stuff just to continue to compete with us. They may have cheap labor, but we have lower cost resources. If you raise the energy it costs to produce those, we'll lose one of our few advantages over China.
Yeah, energy is such a driver in the cost of the Hancock County operations that it dwarfs the labor costs, and so that's why you're able to pay the wages that you pay. If we lost that advantage, we'd lose those kind of jobs. You wanted to have a different question?
Well, I was just looking at back through my notes, and Dr. Langford and Mr. Holt and Mr. Timmons had all mentioned something about trade policy, and Mr. Harwell had alluded to some of that as they bring things back in. But Dr. Langford mentioned export controls, and I think as we look at the drones and the ISR assets that are so critical for our troops, and my district has Fort Campbell located in my district. When I hear you say export controls, that is something that does get my attention. But as we look at the need to think forward and think in terms of trade agreements, I would love to hear a little bit about what works with our commercial attaches, what doesn't, what works with the Commerce Department, what doesn't, what works with USTR, what doesn't, where some of those headaches are, because we want to create the environment where manufacturing grows domestically and our exports grow. And indeed, in Tennessee, we've been fortunate over the past decade to see about a 20% increase in our exports. So I'd love to hear a little bit of weigh-in on and an expansion on the thought on the trade policy.
Well, the first thing I would say is that the Commerce Department and the Commerce attaches in the embassies do a great job. They're kind of unsung heroes, and they're kind of a good budget target, but they are an important part of building the export strategy. And we recently had our first international sale, actually to the country of Switzerland, and we would not have been able to do that had not the embassy been a great help in sort of tutoring us through some of the steps that one had to go through to work in the export market. And the Commerce attaché there, at the same time they were helping us make our first export sale, they were fighting to keep their budget from being zeroed and the office closed because of the budget pressures that we all face. So that's a clear challenge in that.
You know that, Bill?
I have a comment. We've exported our garments for several years, and we recently got invited with my new business that's now in Thousand Palms to attend a China trade show. The China Chamber of Commerce has requested specifically for California consumer-made goods to attend a trade show in late March. I think that those trade shows are very important for manufacturers who are in the United States to be bigger parts of the global trade world, and that if we could have more of these trade shows and have more U.S. companies attend them, it will definitely increase our export. And that kind of relates a little bit to what you mentioned, Congresswoman Blackburn, in regards to export. So I think that's very important and very valuable. Instead of having all these imports coming in from China to start to do exporting to that country, I think that will potentially be huge for several U.S. companies. So I just wanted to make that comment.
So you look at blue jeans has been something you can export.
What we found is that the China middle class has grown so much in the last couple of years that they themselves are looking for U.S.-made goods, and they find them to be of better quality. I think that's also part of the reason specifically that the China Chamber of Commerce requested for U.S.-made consumer goods. I do believe that there is a marketplace for various type of U.S. goods that could be exported to China, and that's just one country. I think there are several countries that if we found the right resources to send U.S. companies over there, that would definitely increase our exporting opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you. Bill, you said that you do 3/4 here and to sell. You manufacture 3/4 here, and your market is 3/4 overseas.
Yes. So there's two aspects of trade policy that I'm probably not a content expert, but because the bulk of our market is overseas, generally a fair and a no trade restriction policy is in our best interest. The industry that we are is an attractive industry for other countries. That's why they will pay incentives to move factories to those countries. It's not that they want to help Intel. They want that base to be developed within their country. That also makes them at times consider trade policies that would encourage local manufacturers. So if we get into trade disputes with people, what we export is potentially a target. And so in general, on the trade side, we're just looking for a neutrality situation where we can compete without governments getting involved in unbalancing the playing field. We do have some challenges with export controls as well, and there is a place for protecting certain kinds of technology, but we're reaching a place where the technology that goes into a cell phone, if it's evaluated with one particular mindset by some of the export controls, would be supercomputer technology of a few years ago, and therefore we can't sell depending upon exactly how the evaluation is done. And so the need to modernize some of these and realize that technology has advanced to the place that you can't prevent something like this from being potentially used as a military device because the technology is the same. And I think it's that aspect of export controls that they serve a purpose, but we have to make them consistent with where things are today, not where they were 20 years ago, where you could actually restrict that and therefore potentially can maintain some kind of advantage for the country.
Jay?
So trade policy is absolutely critical to any comprehensive economic growth strategy for this country, and Congresswoman Blackburn, Tennessee is a great example of a state that has taken advantage of opportunities that have begun to emerge around the world. I congratulate the House and Congress for passing the 3 free trade agreements that languished for years. But that's just such a small piece of the puzzle. 95% of consumers live outside of the borders of the United States. So if manufacturers are going to continue to make things to be able to get in the hands of consumers, we have to realize that a vast majority of those consumers live outside of the borders of the United States. There are literally dozens of free trade agreements being negotiated around the world today. The United States is a party to one of those, just one. And so we need to step up our involvement and our interest in negotiating free trade agreements, but Congress also needs to give the executive a bit of a hand here and pass trade promotion authority for the executive, regardless of who the executive is. The days of worrying about free and fair trade, I think, are past, and I think that's a good thing because I think manufacturing workers at all levels understand that the opportunities are not just here in this country, but are outside the country. I visit manufacturers all over the country, and oftentimes you'll hear the leaders in those companies say that 30, 40, 50, even 60% of their company's workforce is specifically dedicated to exports. That is a huge economic driver for this country.
Thanks. And we're going to switch subjects with Chairman Bono Mack, but just Bill, intellectual property, is that a decision for you guys about the ability for the protection of intellectual property, I guess is the right word?
Well, we're certainly concerned about protecting intellectual property, but I think Our concern is more with the patent laws in general and also being outdated, and the fact that where they were originally intended to protect manufacturers, we've developed a methodology of making money without making anything. And if you look at what's happening in the patent space, in terms of patent trolls, people that buy patents from bankrupt companies with the only purpose of suing someone with no intention of ever making anything. I mean, that aspect of the patent law is something, and the IP process is a big concern for us. It's also something that many foreign competitors are in fact filing more patents in the U.S. Those patents will eventually be used in similar manners. So I think our concern is not so much protecting our intellectual property. Our industry in general has never been particularly litigious. We don't sue each other because we have so many. The products that we build are so complicated, they have so many patents, you almost are certainly cross-licensed, or if you're not, if you're actually making something, you protect yourself because what you're making, what he's making, you just leave each other alone. But this mindset of buying patents simply to sue someone or to stop them from making something with no intention of actually doing anything useful with it, I think is where our biggest concern in the intellectual property area is. I saw someone nodding. You probably have a similar problem.
Yeah,
Complex
absolutely.
products take lots of patents. They're not like single product patents.
I was just going to echo that point, that has become probably the dominant factor in the patent thing is it's a defensive game and primarily based around litigation rather than actual protection of the manufacturing process.
We have been reworking our patenting strategy around protecting ourselves, not patenting our best ideas, but patenting the ideas that are likely to be something we can use against the companies we expect to be sued by. So it's a very distorted use of the patent system, which was intended to encourage manufacturing and sharing of ideas. It's now become something that really needs a lot of work.
I read earlier in regards to the toy company how it's very difficult for you to protect your intellectual property of specific items that you make, and we share the same issues in the garment industry, not so much with what happens here in the U.S., but products that get made overseas. There's very little protection for U.S. consumer goods, and that's something that I think is another good reason. One of the reasons that makes sense to bring back manufacturing from China is to protect that intellectual property that doesn't get so much protection over there. I know that Arad, he's with me here, he has one of the largest copyrighted fabric printed selections in the U.S. But I think where he struggles is also once it gets into Chinese factories, it's extremely difficult to protect the intellectual property from that point on. So it is something that I would be interested in learning more and what's being done to protect U.S. intellectual property overseas.
Thanks. Anybody have any other questions or comments? We have to use the microphone there.
I wanted to add to Mr. Harwell also about the testing that he goes through. I do a lot of testing for certain department stores when it comes to ITS, SGS. I'm sure he goes through the same thing. And he was saying a word of fear. I think the fear comes from lack of knowledge or education. I think if someone was hired who had a little bit more of a background in the textile industry when it comes to toys or garments, I think we would run into it would be a lot more of an efficient process for both of our businesses. I'm not sure if you understand what I mean by that. I can explain if you want.
Hired by the government or hired by the business? Safety.
I think it should start with the government and trickle down to the businesses. Do you understand what I mean, or not really? Yeah. No. If, for example, if the government is going to impose a certain law, especially when you run it into a kids market, and they need to know what kind of testing needs to be applied, and for example, I'll give you a good example. One thing that we do is we have a certain color that needs to be tested. When it goes from the department store, let's say it becomes cobalt, and comes down the line and we want to test it and we put blue, the test fails. I'm sure you know something like that. Or have you run into something like that?
If the product is named incorrectly?
Yes,
Yeah.
for example. And it's same style number, same product item number. I mean, that's just one example. I mean, I'm using a minor example. There's other examples. I mean, I'm talking, when I'm referring to the lack of knowledge, I'm not referring to that. The lack of knowledge is the textile itself. If someone understood what that textile is, where it comes from, how it needs to be efficiently tested, I think it would be a lot more beneficial to both of our businesses. That's what I'm trying to tell you. So the same product doesn't need to get tested over and over and over again. That's what I was referring to. Okay. That's all.
Okay.
Just kind of for the good of the order, for anybody to comment or throw out here, we have a number of hearings coming up on jobs, job creation, manufacturing, also Trans-Pacific Partnership. I was wondering if anybody wanted to weigh in yet on your thoughts on the TPP and give us some advice going forward into some hearings about what you'd like to see or what would be helpful looking at TPP, if you're all looking at it, following it. If not, you don't have to chime in, but I'm very curious for your feedback on that.
That's the one free trade agreement that we are actually involved in at this point. From a manufacturing standpoint, we're very supportive. Obviously, there are issues involving access to markets that for some of the countries that either are part of the original agreement or want to be brought into the agreement. But overall, we think the agreement is a good thing. It needs to move forward quickly. And while I don't want to diminish the focus on TPP, again, I think we need to be, what I would love to see happen is I would love to see committees having to look at the benefits of literally dozens of agreements that have been negotiated. This is one, and we need to give it very thorough thought, and we need to make sure that the access is there, that it's reciprocal, and that we get rid of any non-tariff barriers that may be in place. But I'm hopeful in the future we can be looking at a whole lot more than just one.
Kind of to close this, and Jay, I'll give you a question if anybody else wants to comment on. But just in preparing for this, I was really looking at the tax issue, and if you're a single source American, 100% United States trying to ship overseas, it really puts you at a bigger disadvantage than others. So I was preparing for this and had a couple of economists come in, and one was saying that if you were a company that had intellectual property, you could sell it to a subsidiary overseas, lease it to your United States firm, and shift the tax burden so you're not paying 35% on it. But and so we're forcing our companies to do those kinds of things by our tax code, making those kinds of actions instead of just having a simpler tax code for everybody. And then if you're a single source company, family has a medium-sized manufacturing company with no overseas operations, and anything you sell overseas, you have no opportunity to do that as well. I mean, I'm saying make in here and sell overseas. So that's something we really have to focus on, and I know our Dave Camp, Chairman of Ways and Means, has really got that under looking at that very closely. But we talked a lot about just manufacturing. If we continue down the path we're on, the way the government's going, this Jay, where do you think we'll be in the next few years? Where's the pathways leading to? And obviously, we have the opportunities to make changes that we've identified today. And if we were to make those changes, what do you think manufacturing? We didn't do specific changes like the tax code, but making it simpler. If we improve of course, most of that should be done in Frankfurt and Indianapolis and Nashville. But if we improve our local skills, and which we need to do, I'm not saying we don't, just because it's more of a state issue, but need to do. Where do you think the pathway is on if we make the changes you think we need to make versus two pathways? We're at the crossroads, right?
Well, exactly. We're like that Frost poem. We're trying to figure out which road to take, and we really are at a very crucial point in our nation's history, and we also are in a unique position to take advantage of history as history is playing out right now on the manufacturing front. As I said when I opened my remarks, it really doesn't matter what level of office a candidate is running for. Manufacturing is the subject du jour folks are talking about it. They're recognizing the strength and the promise that manufacturing brings to any economy. The United States has been the undisputed leader of manufacturing in the world. We still are. 21% of global output comes from the United States. Our nearest competitor is China at 15%. They're nipping at our heels. But so are other countries, India, Japan, and others. And the reason for that is because of self-imposed burdens that we've placed on ourselves. If we do have a concerted effort to strengthen manufacturing in this country, I do believe we're on the verge of a manufacturing renaissance. I would commend to all of your attention this document, A Manufacturing Renaissance. It focuses on investment. It focuses on trade. It focuses on workforce development, which, as you note, is incredibly important. And it also focuses on innovation. And in all of those areas, there are policy prescriptions. I often get the question, Congressman, in fact, you and I have actually talked about this, I often get the question from members of Congress who have, every day, you have 5,000 issues on your desk and on your plate. You get the question, well, what's the one thing that you could do to improve manufacturing? It's a false choice. You've got to do it all, because if we really want to maintain our model of leadership, we've got to make some very difficult choices. We need leadership at the executive level. We need leadership at the congressional level. And there needs to be a unified effort, a nonpartisan, I've heard the term bipartisan, but a nonpartisan effort to revive manufacturing and to take advantage of this unique point in our history. And to your basic question, I can't predict, what share of manufacturing output we'll be able to retain or to grow in this country. It'll be more than we have now. What will our manufacturing employment be in the future as we have productivity gains, et cetera? Well, the more we focus on manufacturing, the more that we encourage investment in manufacturing in this country, the more opportunities we create for Americans. There's a 27% bonus, if you will, for every manufacturing job in this country. They pay 27% more than a job elsewhere in the economy. They're great jobs. They're well-paying jobs. They don't require a college degree, although we have certainly a large number of college graduates in manufacturing. And they can help us recover economically and grow our economy in the future. So I appreciate the attention to manufacturing that this roundtable has provided, and I'm hopeful that you all will use your persuasive powers to encourage your colleagues to embrace the 4 goals for economic growth that are outlined here and really work hard to grow the manufacturing economy in this country.
If I could make a kind of an ending statement as well, I think that it was well stated. There is not one thing you can do because each business is different. I think there are some bright spots. What you're seeing is the long-time historical issue of labor cost is going to be a lesser issue going forward. You see it here in no offense, low-tech, very labor-intensive work. They can still afford to come back because of the quality of the work that they get. Our cost of labor is not the significant factor. So we can't hide behind labor costs as being why we're losing jobs. It's what was said here. We do things to ourselves. We create, not to pick on taxes, but we create the highest corporate tax rate. It's not conducive to manufacturing. We keep old regulations like export controls that will probably keep you from shipping your product that really is not going to be a danger to us. But the rules are so old and they're addressing issues that are gone. We're doing things to ourselves that just make us ineffective. And we have to realize the market is all overseas. We can't be in manufacturing and just ship to ourselves. You pointed out 95% of the consumers are not in this country. And as they become more affluent, they become the market we have to sell to. The same thing that is making our labor more cost effective, it's moving the market there as well. So we can't protect ourselves by trade policies because we will be hurting ourselves at the other time. So you can't fix one thing, but I think the probability or the possibility of addressing some of these issues would make the future for manufacturing in this country quite bright because many of the things are turning in our favor. It's just the things we're doing to ourselves that have to be fixed.
Yeah, I like the flexibility of American manufacturing. When I was in college. I was in military school in the 80s, and everybody's talking about Japan. And they have a high tax code, they have high regulatory, and they've been struggling since then. And what your business has done from when you started in 1974 to what the product you're producing now, two different worlds, isn't it? Yeah. Completely two different worlds. But
Japan's figured it out.
Because you're able to keep up because we're flexible.
Trying to fix it, but they did, in fact, strongly damage themselves by their policies, which were, it's a whole long topic. But you have to be very careful because you can, in fact, destroy what was a manufacturing powerhouse. They are not the same that they were because of policies, not because they're any less competent workers.
Well, if there's no other closing comments, we certainly appreciate everybody. Members of Congress have been here today. Greg Harper, Leonard Lance, Dave McKinley. Appreciate the chairwoman for putting this together for us. And as we said, this is the beginning of a conversation that we're serious about. And we're going to be moving forward through formal committee processes, the things that we can do to make sure we have the best manufacturing base in this country and not do things to ourselves to force our people to have to look other places to do business because of things that we can control here, that we can do. We aren't the entrepreneurs that create jobs, but we certainly can put the brakes on entrepreneurs that do so, and we're going to make sure that we're looking at those policies. So this has been very helpful, and we appreciate you taking your time, your busy days to come here, especially Mike, my friend from Hancock County, Kentucky. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.